Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Today I am here to share all of the pans I hit in the first quarter of the year of 2022, and I'm also going to go through the shades that I finished, because there was actually a few shades that I did finish up, which is very exciting, because previous years I have been very focused on hitting pan, and that's still a focus of mine this year, but I also do want to use up some shades, and I also do want to get use out of my whole collection as a whole, but I do want to share the pans that I hit this year as well, but I'm not gonna have as much focus as I did last year, because if you did watch last year I did try to hit 100 pans, and I did actually hit my goal of that, but the pans that I'm gonna hit this year is not gonna be anywhere near that, so the numbers will be lower, but I still have quite a few pans to share with you, and I'm very happy so far with what I've achieved this year. But yeah, I'm just gonna jump into the items I have to share with you. But before I do so, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So I'm gonna go in chronological order of when I hit the pans, and then afterwards I will go through the ones that I finished. So the first pan I hit this year is actually a single, and it's not like a magnetic single, it's actually a single compact, which is a thing that I don't really use very often, but that is a shade from Burberry in the shade Rosewood, and I had this shade in my Pandas eyeshadows, and this is what the compact looked like. I hit pan on this, like I said, in my Pandas eyeshadows, and I mainly use this as a brow powder actually, although it is more of a satin shade. I also use this as an all over the lid kind of shade, but mainly as an eyebrow shade, which it worked really well for. I was very gentle with this eyeshadow because I didn't want to ruin the pattern completely, so I hit a very narrow pan there in the middle, but I did hit pan, and this was the first pan of the year. The next pan came from my level 1 of my level up project pan, and that is the Star Wars Mandalorian palette, and this is the child palette. They have, since this palette released a few more of the Mandalorian series, they have the Mando palette, like the Mandalorian. I think it's called Mando or the Mandalorian, because obviously Mandalorian is the name of the series, but it's also a character, doesn't matter. And then they also done the Vader palette, but I have the child palette, and this, like I said, was my level 1 in my project level up, and I hit pan on the shade The Force, which is this one right here. This is my favorite shade in the palette, and I absolutely loved working on this. And as you can see, I have a few other pans in this palette, but those came from other projects, and that is the pan that I hit. The next pan is actually not an eyeshadow pan, because this year I'm also tracking like every type of pan that I'm hitting this year, and the third pan of this year comes from my Becca under eye primer. This is the anti-fatigue under eye primer, and I have this in my whole collection of project pan, or my deck of panning, one or the other, but this is what it looks like. And as you can see, I did hit pan there on the bottom. Honestly, I haven't reached for this at all since I rolled it out, and this is definitely a product that I will pan eventually, because it works nicely, but it doesn't really make enough of a difference for me that I want to repurchase. I mean, Becca's gone anyway, but a product like this is just something that I don't really necessarily need in my collection. But I will probably pan this at some point completely, but yeah, for now I'm happy with pan. So the next pan is a palette that I'm gonna share quite a lot in this video, and that is my Modern Renaissance palette, which is obviously my Panda palette this year. If you don't want any spoilers for my Panda palette, I would probably maybe skip this video, because I'm going to share with you all of the pans I've hit, and also obviously show my palette. It hasn't been that long, it's been about a week since my last update, so I will have loads more progress before my next update, in case you are worried about spoiling the next update. And I think I'm probably going to have, yeah, enough progress that you're still going to get a bit of a surprise then, but I do want to share it in this video, because I have hit quite a few pans in this palette. But the first eyeshadow I actually hit from this palette was the shade Venetian Red, which is this one down here. And you can see I actually have quite a sizable pan in this one now. It's one of my bigger pans in this palette, and it's one that I've been focusing on a lot. But that is the first pan that I've hit in this palette this year, and I did have a lot of pans in this palette already when I introduced it as my Panda palette. But yeah, that was the first one I hit this year. So next up we have a pan from my level 2 palette from my product level up, and that was my Novena palette from Anastasia. In here I first hit pan on the shade Summer, which is the shimmer shade up here. I love this shimmer. The shimmers in this palette is absolutely stunning. They're so kind of metallic and is impactful, and I love this shade. So that is the next shade that I hit pan on, and that was pan number 5 for this year. And I'm gonna go back to this palette soon to share the next pan that I hit, because obviously it was my level 2 palette. But for now, that is the pan that I hit. And before I actually jump back into that palette, next up we have another pan from my Modern Renaissance palette. And the second shade that I hit pan on in this palette this year was the shade Warm Taupe. It's this one right here, actually next to Venetian Red. And this one I have mainly been using in my eyebrows, and that is why the pan is shaped the way it is. But this is the 6th pan that I hit this year, and also the 2nd pan that I've hit in my Panda palette. So like I said, for the next pan we are going to go back to my Novena palette, and I actually hit the 2nd pan for my product level up, and that was in the boring shade in the palette, which is base, this one right here. So that is the next pan that I hit. I mean, I use this as a blending out shade. I don't set my eyeshadow base, but I use these as blending out shades, and that is the next one I hit pan on. So again, we're gonna jump back to my Modern Renaissance palette, because the next pan that I hit is also in here. I think this is actually the last time I'm gonna share this palette in this video. Actually it's not, but for the pan part it is. But the next pan that I hit in this palette is the shade Burnt Orange down here, and you can see that I have expanded the pan quite a lot since I hit pan on it. But that is the next pan, which is pan number 8. So next up we actually have another product that is an eyeshadow, and that is my highlighter. This is the Mary Lou Luminizer from The Balm, and this one I hit pan on in my rolling pretty pan this year. I'm actually trying to finish it, but so far I have only hit pan, and you can see it's a tiny pan, and that is because I have, since hitting pan, tried to focus around it, because the dip is there in the middle, but there's still a lot of product around the edges, so I wanted to focus on wearing that down a bit before I continue expanding the pan. But yeah, that is the next pan that I've hit. So next up we have another pan that was in my Pandos eyeshadows, and that is from my Elva palette by Odin's Eye. And that is the first shade in the palette, which is again more of a boring one, but this is definitely a bit deeper than the other cream shade that I showed you, and this was more of a transition shade for me. But this is the shade Jasmine, and like I said, I hit pan on this in my Pandos eyeshadows. I actually just updated that product a couple of days ago, so you would have seen it in there. But I'm happy that I hit pan on this, and these pans are so deep. That's probably the deepest pans that I have in my collection, that I know of at least, or that I can think of right now. So super deep pans in this palette, but I'm happy to have a pan showing in this, and it's a relatively new palette to me. I picked this one up in November for the Black Friday sale, so I haven't had it for that long, and I'm excited to have had the chance to show it some love. So we actually have 2 more pans to go. The next one also comes from my Pandos eyeshadows, and that is a shade from my Nikkie Tutorials and Beauty Bay palette. And I was working on the shade Underground in here, which is this shade up here, and you can see there that I hit a little bit of a pan in this. These pans are very shallow and very easy to kind of hit pan on, and the shimmers as well are very kind of putty like, so it didn't really take very long to hit pan on this. But this is the 11th pan that I hit in the first quarter. And then lastly we have a pan that actually comes from my level 3 palette in my product level up, and that is the Juvia's Place Magic Mini palette. I am working to hit pan on 3 shades in here, but I did hit pan on one of them in the month of March, and I'm continuing to work on the others now in April and the second quarter of the year. But the pan that I did hit is the shade Jajide down here. It's like a deep blue. It looks almost black on camera, but it's just a really deep blue, and that is the shade that I hit. And with this one I mainly use it as an eyeliner. I also use it as a dipping up shade sometimes, but like I said, mainly as an eyeliner. And yeah, that is what the palette looks like now. A very loved palette, and that was, like I said, my first pan from my product level up. So in total in the first quarter of the year I hit 12 pans, which is pretty good. Like I said, I've been focusing more on rotating through my eyeshadows and like building my BYOP and getting used to that, reaching for different palettes, trying to reach for every shade in the palette rather than use the ones that I'm using. But that also obviously means that my pans that I hit will go down, because last year I was hyper focused on only using shadows that I was gonna hit pan on, and that was a really good experience for me. It made my collection look way more used. It made me get familiar with a lot of shades and like play around with specific shades to, you know, because if you're trying to hit pan on something, you need to use them quite a lot. So it made me kind of realize how to use certain shades in different ways to get different effects. But this year I just want to make sure that my collection isn't neglected, because like I said, last year I was very hyper focused on the shades that I pan on and the rest went a bit untouched. So that is why my pan percentage, or I guess pan hits this year, isn't going to be as high, but I'm completely fine with that, and 12 is a pretty good number. So before I wrap up this video, I'm just going to go through the 2 shadows that I actually finished in the first quarter of the year, and you might have already spotted them, and they're all both from my Novena palette. The 2 shades that I finished are these 2 right here. The first shade that I did finish is the shade Vermeer right here, as you can see, and yeah, that was just a light champagne shade. I used it as an Icona highlight as well as a face highlighter. And then the second shade that I finished is Tempera, which is this one here, and I used that one again as a blending out shade. It is the cream color, you probably all know that, but yeah, those are the 2 shades that I finished. I'm pretty happy with 2 eyeshadows finished. I think in the next kind of couple of months I'm gonna make that number a bit higher per quarter, at least I'm hoping so. As you can see, I already have a lot of pan showing in this palette, and my goal is to finish this whole palette this year, so that's hopefully gonna be quite a few shadows finished. But I also want to finish a few other shades in my collection, and I'm currently working on 3 shadows to finish outside of this project, so hopefully we'll have a few more to show you with you next quarter. But that is going to be it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and otherwise I will catch you in my next one. Bye guys.